What's going on, Workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we're talking about another game, a new MMO that's on its way, Sword of Legends Online. This is a game that I actually went ahead and pre-ordered, and then we ended up getting an email from the company interested in us kind of covering the game itself. And while we haven't applied yet for that, I figured we would sit down and talk about kind of the risks of a new MMORPG. Is it worth it to pre-order? What gets you to jump in? When's the right time?
To any MMO.
To any MMO.
Right? I think it's a bigger topic to any MMO, but we're going to use this game as the example as I ask questions because I know nothing about it.
Chris knows nothing about it. But Chris, we have an actual sponsor for this video. We want to shout out and say thanks. Why don't you tell them about Filthy Meme and his masterful generosity?
I think it's Phil the Meme,
Phil the Meme?
It's hard to say. But thank you so much, Phil. You have done an immense amount supporting us and helping take a big part in especially the early months as I've moved into full-time content creation over here on Twitch, as we have tried to be live for you guys a minimum of 30 hours a week, 8 to 2, Monday through Friday, with a great deal more. So thank you, Phil. It's astounding how much you've done, and you're continually pushing the bar. We have had to add new bits rewards to make sure that your badge is updated as you lead the charge on that.
So thank you again, Phil. We cannot do this without the support of the community, and you are just unbelievably generous. So thank you. That's who is sponsoring this video. You sponsored this video, and you never knew it. We actually had this conversation behind the scenes, and we're like, we got to do something for Phil. So if there's anything we can do for you, sir, you just let us know. But let's go ahead and dive into this subject because it's been something that I've just been on my mind. And I figured, why not talk about Chris? You got questions. I've got some of the answers because I've been doing some research, and I went ahead and actually pre-ordered the game. So let's talk about it. What question comes up to mind first, and we can go from there.
I'd like to compare it to 14 here because you're saying, my understanding is you're saying that it's buy to play here in the West and subscription in China. So what we're going to do to compare it, since we're here in the West, is we'll compare it to a subscription-based game, Final Fantasy XIV here in the West, versus a buy to play here. So if I were getting into Final Fantasy XIV today and I was asking the value proposition there, and same with this game, and then you can just answer with this game, like, first of all, like, what's the plan here? What am I, right? Am I a big character? Am I part of a big giant world? Like, what's the plan?
So the plan for the game itself, in this case, is that you can have one of 6 different classes, and each class has one of 2 specs. So you have some classes have a range spec, some have so you could pick ranged or healer or tank and support or something like that. So every class has 2 different builds. You got 6 of those, but it's very themed around obviously Chinese mythology, the world in and of itself, very artistic. Honestly, when I look at it though, it feels more inspired, obviously, like what I would compare to Final Fantasy XIV, as opposed to something of a Korean-based MMORPG. This is like the #1 subscription-based MMORPG in China. They actually have a TV series about it. Like, the parallels that all of a sudden when I start jumping in on it, I was like, oh, 14 has a TV series now. Like, there's this model that seems very, very familiar. And the art style for me, like, as somebody who enjoys obviously Asian-based and styled, MMOs, one of the games I'm looking forward to is more about Blue Protocol. Like, there is this sense that I'm like immediately drawn into the art style and immediately interested in how the combat itself plays. And so that's when all of a sudden my interest peaked on it. Is like, okay, it's an action-based MMORPG. And then when the first weird thing was like, okay, it's subscription in China, but it's not subscription here. Okay.
Not uncommon.
Okay, like, is there any example you can think of? Because
so I know when WoW first came out and was in its big heyday, it was monthly subscriptions here in the US, and it was hourly subscriptions, hourly purchase, like you'd have a prepaid cell phone in China, because at the time the way WoW was being played was in LAN cafes, and so you paid for your access to your computer based on a number of hours. So you paid for your access to World of Warcraft based on a number of hours because it aligned with what the market was doing in that area. By the time you factor for different currencies, I know WoW's in a lot of hot water with what they're doing with Brazil currency right now. When you look at what these games do, Final Fantasy, when you look at how to structure what a what a game costs and how you propose that to customers in an area, especially when you get in an area where regulations may be a factor. You may have to do different things with your localization team. You may have different cultural issues that you have, hoops that you have to jump through before you can hit the publish button. Certain things may be restricted. Certain parts of the world restrict things like loot boxes and stuff like that. So you may have to find a different way of making the same amount of money in those markets. So it is not uncommon at all for a live service game that's going to be around for a long time and want a little bit of money from you up front and a continued amount of money from you long term. It's not uncommon at them at all to set that price and how that price is proposed to the customer on a regional level. So it doesn't bother me at all that they're separate. They're probably aiming to make about the same amount of money per person. The question is how they're going to propose that.
Yeah. And that's where, like, when I started diving in and researching more about this game, I started watching like Lazy Peon videos of gameplay and things like that. So the game has existed for years. And that's another thing of curiosity. Typically, we've seen like, hey, we have this game, and then eventually it goes further, you know, like for example, Final Fantasy XIV, China is actually running an older version, and then that kind of trickles in because they have to do extra special work. And in this case, it's like, well, China's actually already had this game for over 2 years now. And so you're not necessarily getting the launch we're not getting the launch version. We're getting a hybrid of like different quality of life, but we're not getting every feature that's currently in China.
How did that work with EU servers when they went online for 14?
So EU servers, they were transferred. So people were already playing. There wasn't an EU data center. So it wasn't like the region just came online. It was always there. People from the EU would play. They would just end up playing on a Japanese server or a North American server. So a little bit different, where like China obviously being kind of like walled off, where in 14's case, like we can't play with China. Like they are on their own servers. We don't have access to them. Same thing in this regards. This launch is not playing with them. It's like, hey, we're going there, and they're coming to NA, you know, EU and other regions that it's launching. So I was just like, okay.
So all of the content that we're getting on launch, there will be a race to get through it for new players, but that content is all old content.
Correct.
Are we going to always be behind, or is the plan to catch us up?
Right now, the plan sounds like that we will be trailing the release schedule of the content. So you would, like, if you're in a way,
we'll
like,
always see in the future.
You'll always be able to see in the future what's happening. And if the game is successful, like that could actually be something where like, hey, you know, from a content creation perspective, you could see probably some content creators like, hey, I'm doing VPNs to get the early view of how this new class that is being released is getting released. And so it's a whole mess in that regards. Like it's so like unique because when Japan gets the 14 update, we get that same update. We're not sitting here trailing that. But if somebody was in Korea or or in China, they could actually see into the future if they had access to kind of get through the different navigation paths.
So how are they pricing it? Like what are we buying? The first year's worth of content? Are there microtransactions?
So that's where this is interesting. And that's where like as a red flag, kind of like, whoa, what's going to happen? Because it's so weird that it's a risk. That's why I wanted to sit down. I was like, there's a random risk. I'm willing to jump in and put money in on the table for it. You know, it's like, okay, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, like I've got 14 and Walker in a couple of months anyway, not a big problem. But it's published by GameForge here in the Western release, if you're going to classify it as that. And they've got games like Terra, they run that one. They run a couple of other ones, and they also can be known as a little bit on the pay to win side. But right now they say that it's buy to play, starts like at $40, but beyond just like the initial fee, right? The goal isn't just that initial fee. They want like other fees to help maintain the cost. And they are saying purely cosmetic, but like that comes down to a trust relationship with anybody. Like you can say that you're purely cosmetic at the start, and then later that can change. And so that's kind of where the big, like when you see big shifts in different MMORPGs, because there's a bunch out. Like there was MMOs that launched last year, and we just completely just ignored them. Chat's even talking about like Blade and Soul, but there was also like Alien or like other names that I was like, all right, like
there's a lot out there.
I'm not interested in that one.
So what's the timeline for this? Are they going to do beta tests, alpha tests?
Beta, and it's launching this summer. Like it's launching, and that's what another thing is, that it's launching right in the middle of, have you done everything in Final Fantasy XIV? Are you just waiting for maybe October. It's almost like ingenious in terms of its positioning. One of the things that I've said, like, it's unfortunate that New World wasn't ready now, because I think gamers are really hungry, and that's another thing.
We are hungry,
and that's
games
where
the existing games we're playing are gapping out right now, and they're going to be hitting big waves of content. Guild Wars, I think, is getting more content this year. Final Fantasy is getting a lot of content this year. World of Warcraft should be finally getting content later this year, and right now seems like the time when a new game would really be able to capture people's attention. Okay, so then I guess shift to the content, just trying to blast through this as if I was just quizzing you. This is the conversation we would have on the phone before you got me into a game, or the other way around. What is this centered on? Is this PvE? Is this PvP? Big party, small party? What is the end game cycle? Once I get to cap, what's the plan?
And 5-man dungeons, and then obviously they say that the game does have the Holy Trinity, even though you have flexibility in your class, so you can be, I'm a tank now. Okay, now I'm going to be a DPS. So you can play a class, and you're not like, oh, now I got to switch to another character to kind of change my role. It doesn't give you as much flexibility as 14 does in that regards, where you're like, I got all the roles, baby. I almost cussed, but it was a transition. Figure out another B word, and you'll find out what my brain was thinking. But so you have that. So you got the 5-man dungeons, you got PvP, and then you also have 20-man raids. And that's where I was like, okay, so they, like, clearly being that the game has a community and it's been successful in China, I was like, that, I think that, and coupled with the fact that I'm not into glamour, and if the game does become pay to win, I'm perfectly fine with, like, losing $40, on it, and be like, yeah, was it fun? Yes or no? Like, for me, $40 was like, okay, I'm good to kind of gamble my money in that regards, especially in the midst of, no 14 content, because it's like the art style was essentially interesting, the dungeons and the PvE content sounded interesting, and then and the combat looked really cool, and I was like, okay, cool, like, that's enough to sell it. Now, will it hold? Does it have any staying power? Could it even exist in the market here? Well, I mean, I fall back into the concept of Genshin Impact. We've seen a lot of a lot of Chinese-based games like Genshin Impact coming in and just being a market force. Being that they were
a lot of money spent on marketing.
A lot of money, but they've also made that up in gangbusters. And this being not a free-to-play MMO.
Have they made money?
Yeah. Oh, dude, they announced they made like $2 billion or something. Like, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, but I thought they spent like $1 billion.
They spent like $500 million.
They spent some amount. They spent more in marketing than most games total budget during its entire initial life cycle.
If you got a Genshin Impact ad,
preposterous amount of money.
Yeah, it was obscene, but it was
just straight up advertising.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm also wondering if they're gonna have that kind of process here with this, even though like GameForge is the publisher in and of itself. I still have concerns about the game. But at the same time, I'm very interested. Like I said, it's like as soon as I already had pre-ordered the game, all of a sudden we get emails from like their influencer program, and I was like, I'll talk to Chris about it, because like I'm willing to throw $40 at it. And then it's like, okay, if they want to give me access to an alpha, so I can go hands on and say, yeah, it's fun, or no, I would avoid it. It just seems like this. It's just an interesting picture because a couple things are lining up, and I'm kind of, it's like as a warning to anybody, it's going to be a big hype train. Like no matter what, like you're going to see a lot of hype around it.
When do you get on a game, right?
Yeah.
And so like Final Fantasy is entering its own version of hype as we build towards Endwalker. And there are players that I see regularly kind of stopping by stream or in the comments and saying, hey, I've been looking at trying this game, or I tried it before and I've been thinking about coming back. Do I come back at the launch of Endwalker, or do I come back now? And with an existing game that's entering a season of hype, you want to go into the season prepared. And so there's a certain amount of prep work that can be done. If you're a veteran player, usually that prep is pretty much done. It's just cleaning up inventory, button up a few kind of existing achievements. But for a returning or a new player, there's actually quite a bit of runway that you need to get through when we all depart come this fall. And so many times it's start now. But with a new game, there's usually very little way to do that. Like with beta and alpha access, will any of that progress transfer onto live servers?
No.
Usually not. The vast majority of the time, Outriders is one of the exceptions. The stuff you do early on is usually going to get deleted. And that's because they're like, you know what? We're going to make drop rates really high, give you guys a chance to see everything. We're going to have some broken stuff, take advantage of it, have a good time. We're going to wipe the slate clean and everybody's going to start fresh. So there's very little prep you can do outside of go out and watch YouTube videos, go out and read what you can. In this case, there's going to be people who have put out English articles that have played the game in Chinese and are going to know this game, and they're going to have this huge leg up, and they're going to be ready to impart that knowledge. That's the level of prep you can do, and then have everything cleared off your schedule. So if you're trying to push through maybe Octopath Traveler over on Game Pass right now, go ahead and get that beaten prior to this launch. If you know that you want to play Final Fantasy this fall and you want to take a break from Final Fantasy and play this game or any other game this summer, have Final Fantasy buttoned up now. So you might find yourself pushing in 5.5 because you're trying to earn this kind of time off where you don't feel like you're missing out on 14 because you finished all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're just waiting.
Yeah. The anyway, and the last bit of thing that got me interested, in the game is that it has controller support. And I was like, oh, excellent. So that was something that I thought was really kind of interesting. So the fact is that the art style, the combat, the classes seem interesting. The fact is that for me, with Endwalker, like there's nothing that's going to take up that spot when that drops. Like Endwalker is going to be my jam. So right. It's the fact that there's also not a subscription model to this game made it to where it's like, oh, cool. Like I could play this for a little bit, have some fun with it, maybe level out a class and check out the end game, and then be like, all right, like Endwalker, yum, 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 yum. All right, cool. I've leveled everything in Endwalker. It's been several months. What does that support look like on that back end? Sure, I could easily just kick back and, just wait, and wait till like after Endwalker. But sometimes it's kind of fun to be a part of, like, hey, everybody's checking out this game. We're all talking about it. Sure. This is exciting, especially in that gap of this summer of like, hey, now there could be another thing that comes out that's equally as exciting. Like we just don't know. And that's where I think this one coming out of almost nowhere was just like, all right, well, talk to me. Like we still don't know a date on PSO2 New Genesis. Like there's plenty of grinding games. There's
New
plenty
World
of things
won't move up.
New right. World's not moving up. And that's the real
9.1 is still stalled out in WoW. Final Fantasy XIV 5.5 is a very clearable amount of content. So MMO wise, you and I are working through Guild Wars. I just hit cap and got my first glider and my first mount, and you've got to catch up there, and you're right behind me.
Yeah. Close.
That's it. And so I think it's where does it fit? Balancing multiple MMOs is really hard to do if you're in the learning curve on them. If you have a game in maintenance mode, once you've achieved everything you want to achieve in 14 or any other game, it is very easy to clear just the portion of the patch that appeals to you, each patch, especially if you're just doing it on like one job, one class.
Yeah.
For a number of years, I only played one job, one class because that made sure that I always had room for other games. That's how I made room. When you start building in alts, when you start saying I'm going to level all the jobs, games become real big, real fast because that acts as a multiplier in the amount of replayability. So, I mean, it could definitely be worth an initial tour, an initial kind of loop. And if nothing else, I think you bring up a valid point of a game to play on your own, totally alone, years after release has to be good on its own, or you have to be building to a current expansion that's waiting for you. There has to be a payoff, or it has to be a payoff in itself. But something like Genshin, people who play now like it. People who played it on launch, there are people who got a lot of fun and may have never liked the content loop. There is a portion of it that being part of it, will be the same with Endwalker. Being on the servers on day one, there's an aspect of that is not something Square Enix made. It's not something Square Enix built. There's an aspect of it that's communal, and it's created by us, the fan base, where it's fun to be part of Endwalker on launch, well beyond the content on its own, because you're part of something. It's like a digital convention where you get to surround yourself with a preposterous number of other nerds, and there's just something fun about sharing in something just for the sake of it. So I think if nothing else, on launch is interesting. Usually I'm either going to play something on launch to be part of the hype and be part of that, or I'm going to give it enough time that I'm going to wait for the initial content cycle and wait for the reviews and make sure I'm not going to put time into something junky. So the time before and that time right after, those are kind of dead windows for me as far as jumping into games.
So, well, guys, if it ends up being something, we'll hear back if they want us as a part of their little program, which would actually give us access to the alpha. I get access to the beta because I pre-ordered, so we'll see if I get any earlier access. And I don't know if we'll see Chris making videos on it, but I do have a video planned on coming out on Ginger Prime probably here in the next couple of days, that breaks down like what you need to know about the game, like what I've researched into it, what my concerns are, which are kind of covered here, but I want to make sure that I get some visibility on that, so that if you're interested, because you're going to see like a hype train kicking off, like we saw with Genshin, like we saw with a lot of these games, big marketing dollars put behind it. The fact that they're already reaching out to YouTubers, and I'm not gonna, I think even Twitch streamers and things like that, you'll start seeing more and more coverage of it, which generates a lot of hype. And I think with the danger that I see in that is that you have a hungry population that's just waiting for a game. And just waiting for anything, and then they could end up being, maybe taken advantage of, or getting into something that they didn't necessarily, have that kind of payoff in and of itself. So just obviously just, keep getting yourself informed. Never get on the hype train. The hype train has taught us time and time again that it's not worth it. Like, rarely does the hype train like land in a station that everybody's like, yes, that it is great when it does, but it happens so rarely. And so when it doesn't happen, it always ends up feeling like it's all right. They dropped you off in the middle of the desert.
Expectations can get pretty big when we get into a little bit of a group and we kind of foment at the mouth and we're just excited. It's very easy for expectations to exceed any possible form of reality.
Yeah.
And the further those gap gets, it gets to the point where even if the game is good or great, it's not going to satisfy the endless expectations that we put on it.
100%. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share it out with others, especially if you all end up talking about like, hey, let's go take our raid team and run some dungeons or something like that. But for Work to Game, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks for watching. Hopefully you have a good one. We hope to see you next time. But until then,
Phil, you're the best.
Phil, you're the best. Until then, Phil, you're the best. Bye, everybody.